We're going to be looking at the nature of information versus data, because a lot of times when people talk about evolution of life and so forth, they go into the biology and they really don't want to talk about information that much. And since I have a degree in information science, I stress that as a major hurdle to get over from the undirected animal processes. We're going to look at briefly at the role of chance and talk about probability a little bit, and then we'll talk about the information processing in every cell of the organism's body. Then we'll talk briefly about information theory and its ramifications and information and evolution. So that's where we're headed. Just to make sure that everybody understands what I mean when I'm talking about information, functional information has meaning, there's purpose. Data may or may not have any meaning. You could, for example, you could flip a coin multiple times and you get a whole bunch of data, but no information in it. Binary is the smallest base that can hold data. When something holds data, it means it can have multiple positions, and a binary digit has a 0 and a 1. So therefore you could by choice make it a 0 or a 1, and therefore it can hold information. But it's important to realize that when you have information, the sender of the information and the receiver of the information have to agree on that rule, otherwise you don't have information transfer. So that, for example, if you took this binary pattern here and sent it to a printer, what would happen? Well, if there wasn't a rule that was established by the American Standard Code for Information Interchange, who knows what would happen? But that ASCII definition, that rule says that pattern represents lowercase e. And every other letter and symbol has a bit pattern that represents it. And if they didn't all follow the same rules, you get garbage. But anyway, specifying means that it has detectable content that I know has meaning. For example, in the movie Contact, they detected extraterrestrial intelligence by determining that the first 25 prime numbers were detected. That's a very, very, very improbable thing to happen by chance. And when something that improbable is detected and it has meaning, then I can ascribe meaning to that complex specified pattern and say there had to be an intelligent source for it. Now, we're going to look at the DNA transcription and translation process for the manufacturing of proteins from the information perspective. The information perspective, you have the DNA, which has in it about 12 billion bits worth of information. That's in the nucleus of the cell. You have a series of proteins that will unwind the DNA so they can get at the string of DNA. And then you have the enzyme computers that generate from the DNA code a messaging communication structure called messenger RNA. And so that will duplicate the DNA code into the messenger RNA within the nucleus. Then the messenger RNA goes out of the nucleus. That's like sending a message by mail or through the internet or whatever. In this case, it goes from the nucleus to a ribosome. Now, there are more than 2,000 enzyme computers that are used for reading the DNA code in the DNA memory. So you have a multi-computer system that are reading the DNA code. You have a ribosome that has its own RNA for storing its program. And it has, all of these things have operating systems that we don't know anything about yet. We don't know what makes them. So that all animals, all organisms have the same DNA basis. So the genetic code is basically the same for every organism we know about. It's just that the structure of the memory content is defining which organism you're talking about. Now in the meantime, so this message is transferred to the ribosome. In the meantime, you have what's called transfer RNA. Transfer RNA are little computers that go around picking up the amino acid that's connected with the 3 base codon that's connected to the transfer RNA. And there are millions of those. In human beings, there are millions of ribosomes. Each of those are computers. And those are used to manufacture the proteins, and the sequence of amino acids in the protein are determined by the sequence of the bases in the DNA. So you get this idea that here we have a bunch of computers communicating with other computers and manufacturing things in this manufacturing plant called the ribosome that uses a number of millions of computers within each cell. So what happens then is, in the information systems of life, we have some genetic system that's a pre-existing operating system of which we know virtually nothing. Whereas the specific genetic programs are the application programs of life. Just like in a computer program, you can have a word processor, a spreadsheet, or a game program, or whatever. Each organism has its own program in the DNA. But they use the same basis to store that information. The native language is codon-based, the 3-letter bases, and it uses encryption. We know of no case other than intelligently designed encryption devices where encryption is used. Codes also we don't know of any.
What do you mean by
Encryption, the 3 bases that are specified for a codon specify a particular amino acid. So it's encrypted. The amino acid that ultimately is going to go into the protein is encrypted by the letters of the bases along the DNA. The enzyme's output is to another operating system, so we have multiple operating systems. Basically, there are multiple operating systems, there are multiple programming languages, because these are all programming systems, and we have programming systems in the enzymes, in the DNA code itself, in the transfer RNA, in the ribosomes. All of them have programming in them. There's encoding and decoding hardware and software, which we know virtually nothing about yet. It's far more complex than any man-made computer that ever has existed. There are specialized communication systems, there's error detection and correction, and all of these things are in every single cell of every single organism. The prescriptive information is intrinsically formal. Just like a computer program doesn't just appear by magic on a disk or something, or memory. A computer programmer makes it happen. He mentally solves the problem, then implements it in a computer programming language, for example. Another interesting thing about the top-down part that was talked about, in computer science, I've taught computer science many times, we get into top-down programming. You don't start writing a program from the bottom up. It will be a jumbled up nonsense mess. And if it's very complex at all, it will not work. And that's just, the standard computer programming technique. If you're going to design a program, you start at the top level and work your way down. And that's